Philosophy of God, class number 4 on the act of creation. The midterm is due before the next class. We'll talk about it when we meet in person. Also, when we meet in person, you'll have a chance to ask me. We'll sort of have a review session before the midterm before the midterm is due. Take a look at the questions that are posted on Moodle, and we'll be able to go over any of those that you want to before your midterm. All right. So, what else? That might be a good time to start thinking about paper topics, and make sure you run them by me before you start writing anything. It's not due for like over a month, so it's not the end of the world, but it's a good time to start thinking. Okay, today we're going to go over the act of creation. Remember that the questions that are there at the end of the reader are not all. I'm not going to go over all of them, so I'm going to be skipping around today. The ones on Moodle are the ones that I'm going to really kind of use, so that it's a little bit more refined there. Among them, there's these two questions in the reader. How do we know that God can act by will and not only by necessity? It's kind of it's an interesting topic, but it's a little bit abstract. It's not directly related to the topic of creation today. I do want to make this one distinction, though. When we say that God acts by necessity, or that something acts by necessity, that's referring to, in the context of this question, among other things, a Neoplatonic doctrine. I think Plotinus is the one that spent the most time talking about this, called emanation. Emanation is not the same as God creating. When the Neoplatonic one emanates, so in Neoplatonism there's the one, which is sort of their God. The one emanates into being, and being emanates into good, the good, and so on. There's sort of emanations kind of working outward from the one, or downward maybe. The reason that's even relevant to Aquinas is that emanation is not done by choice. So that act of the Neoplatonic God, that God can't help but emanate into the world through these various stages. The reason why that's important is because for Aquinas, the act of creation is a choice. Emanation is not. Emanation is like heat or light coming out of the sun. The sun can't be the sun and not give out light. God can be God without creating. So that's the important sort of distinction. And the reason why that's important is because of this relationship that there is between the creature and the creator, of utter dependence. So for Aquinas, God didn't have to create us, and he doesn't. There's nothing like sort of forcing him. There's no necessity from within his nature or otherwise. He chose to create as an act of free love, but it was still a choice. An example of emanation that Aquinas accepts is the processions of the Trinity. God chooses to create, but he doesn't choose to be the Trinity. The Father doesn't choose to emanate the Son. That is his very nature, and it's by necessity that happens. So that's a place where I think emanation is something more important for Aquinas, and correct, not in the act of creation. So I just wanted to sort of say that it's not completely like central to our topic today, but I just wanted to sort of go over that. As far as the topic for today, so the first actual question on creation, and this is more just sort of a mental challenge, a mental puzzle, just to kind of like get our minds working. Is it possible for the world to be created but to always have existed? That is the topic of this little essay called On the Eternity of the World, which starts on page 298 of the reader. Let me tell you why this is an important question for Aquinas. You know by now how authoritative Aristotle is in Aquinas' eyes. Well, one of the things that Aristotle taught was that the world did not have a beginning. Okay, and he had his reasons for arguing that, but for Aristotle, he thinks the entire world was always around. There was never a beginning, including And he said, and really all the species that are there of animals and all the way sort of nature is, he really thought that that was just the way things always were from forever. That there was never like a big bang or a moment of creation or anything like that. Aristotle really he just thought the world was always around. The stars always went in the patterns that they did, and that was it. And then there were sort of cycles in history. That's just sort of part of the Aristotelian teaching. Aquinas obviously can't believe that because he believes in Genesis. Though he doesn't, as you know, read everything literally in Genesis, he still accepts it as an authoritative text. And it's really impossible to read Genesis and in any way, symbolically or otherwise, and not conclude, well, the world did have a beginning of time. And so now Aquinas is sort of stuck. He has to accept the authority of Genesis, but he still respects the authority of Aristotle. So what he argues in this little essay is that it was possible, it would have been possible for God to create the world and for there to be a relationship of creature to creator, even if the world didn't have a beginning. And that the relationship of creature to creator is independent of the beginning of time. Okay. Now, why is this interesting? Because it shows that there's a distinction between what creation is and what the beginning of time was. And I think it's an important thing to separate in our minds, in our imagination. When we think of creation, we think there wasn't anything, and then something happened, and then there was stuff. And we think of it as a sequence in time. That's actually not the right way to think about what creation is, what it is that God creates. Creation is not fundamentally a before and after in time reality. Creation is fundamentally a reality of dependence. And it's a dependence that is occurring at every moment. That's the really important thing that I want you to understand. It's not that God created the world. I don't think that's the right way to think about things. It's that God is creating the world. God isn't the creator in the sense that he did something. He's the creator in the present tense in the sense that he is doing something. And creation is something that is always continuously happening. That's the sort of main insight here. So let's look at this essay a little bit. Page 298. I'm just going to kind of skip around a little bit. And I'm not going to... There's a lot of sort of interesting, kind of intricate arguments in here. But let's start with page 300. He clarifies the question a little bit more there. In this, so this is the first, go to the first full paragraph on 300. That, actually no, go up a little bit, go 4 lines down on page 300. In this, therefore, the entire question consists, here's the whole question, whether to be entirely created by God and not to have a beginning in time are contradictory terms. That's the way he's framing this question. Whether you can be completely created by God, but to always have been around. That they are not contradictory can be shown as follows. If they are contradictory, this is for one or both of these 2 reasons. Either because the agent cause must precede the effect in time, or because non-being must precede the effect in time. For we say that what God creates comes to be out of nothing. So he's saying if the world being created needed to have a start in time, that must be because the agent, and he means any agent, must precede its effect in time. He's saying cause and effect have to be related before and after in time if this is the case. He denies that. Okay? He does not think that a cause has to be before its effect in time. Now, it's not that it can be after. He's not saying that a cause can come after the effect, but he's going to argue that a cause and effect can be instantaneous. And that's exactly the kind of cause God is. So go to this next paragraph. First, we should show that it is not necessary that an agent cause, in this case God, precede in time that which he causes, if he should so will. This can be shown in several ways. First, no cause instantaneously producing its effect necessarily precedes the effect in time. God, however, is a cause that produces effect not through motion, but instantaneously. Therefore, it is not necessary that he precede his effects in time. He goes into this in great detail. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but if you look at what comes later, one of the things that that causes a cause to be before its effect in time is that it causes through motion. So, for example, there's a certain potency. This pen has the ability, the possibility of hitting the table. I can let it go, and then it'll fall and hit the table. And what am I doing there? I'm causing something through motion. There's potentiality that's there, and I'm actualizing that potentiality by letting go of the pen. Look at this line. God is a cause that produces effects not through motion. Now, this is one of the later questions, and I might as well just answer it now. Is creation a change? This is number 14 on Moodle. Creation is not a change, because a change or motion is from one thing to another. That's what change is. You're taking one thing and you're making it into another thing. And if a substantial change would be you're changing, grape juice into wine, boiling water, you're changing cold water into boiling water. There's a thing that's there first, and then there's another thing at the end. Whether that's an accidental or a substantial change, it doesn't matter. That's what change is. Creation is not a change because it is out of nothing. And because it's out of nothing, it's not that there was a thing there before and then there's a thing later. There was nothing at the beginning. Therefore, it's not a motion. It's not a change. And if there's not a change, it doesn't need time to happen. Creation is out of nothing. And when we say out of nothing, it's important not to imagine nothing as like some stuff. Nothing is not stuff. It's not prime matter. It's not empty space. It is non-being. And this is not something that we can imagine because there's nothing there to imagine. And so when we say creation out of nothing, because of the limitation of our intellects and our imagination, we imagine a bunch of like black empty space and then God like doing stuff in this black empty space. That's a misleading way to imagine things. It's non-being, and out of non-being, God is causing there to be something. Not out of it, maybe that was even the wrong way to say it, but out of nothing doesn't mean nothing's a thing. We're going to run into walls with our language here because our language is all based on making and on sensible things. This is going to be a totally different thing. Now, what I want to show you, one of the things I think is valuable from today's class is to show us that not just God, but even the activity of creation is something utterly beyond our imaginations to imagine and our intellects to conceive. So this idea of bringing something out of nothing really sort of hits the limitations of our imagination and beyond. Okay, so the first point is this, that because it's not a change, creation occurs instantaneously, immediately, without any passage in time. If that's the case, well, it doesn't need to take time because there's no motion. Well, what else is going to cause, make it take time? Well, on page 301, nor can the conclusion be avoided by saying that God is an agent cause that acts voluntarily, for neither the will nor the voluntary agent need precede its effects in time, unless the agent cause acts from deliberation, which we take to be absent from God. So why else might it take time? Well, maybe God needs to think about something and kind of dwell on it. What's the best way to do this? That's another way for something to take time, for a cause to take time in producing its effect. Not just through motion, but also through just deliberation. But God doesn't need to deliberate. He knows what he's going to do, and so that's not going to take time. And the act itself of creation is not going to take time. Therefore, once that decision is made, instantaneously creation occurs. Okay. So what does creation mean if it's not before a time, at some point X in time, there wasn't something, and then point Y in time, there was something? It is a relationship of not just dependence in the sense of like, oh gosh, I really need water in order to exist. well, yeah, I really need water, or I'm going to get really thirsty, and then eventually I guess I'll die. It's not like that. It's a relationship of absolute, utter dependence of existence itself that is instantaneous. That means not that God created me and then he kind of just let me be. It means that at every moment God is creating me. And if he were to stop creating me, at that instant I would stop existing. That's what it means that God is the creator. That it's continuous, that at this moment, at whatever time it is right now, and whatever day it is right now, at this moment, God is holding me in existence. And that if he were to stop, it's not that God has to do something to destroy me. All he has to do is stop creating me, and then instantly I would cease existing. That's what it is that God is the creator. It's much more dramatic than, oh yeah, there was a guy named God, and then he decided to make some stuff, and now the stuff is just kind of there. No, not at all. Okay. Now, he helps us to imagine this. I'm not even sure I can find it right now, but it's somewhere in this essay. Go to the bottom of page 302. Last line. Rather, the argument merely requires that the nature of the creature is such that if the creature were left to itself, it would be nothing. He has this really funny... Oh, here it is. Okay, found it. Page 303. Here's his... I think he's quoting Augustine here, huh? Middle of the page 303. They somehow contemplate a beginning in causation rather than a beginning in time. Imagine, they say, so it's Augustine quoting the Platonists, who actually end up being right on this, according to Aquinas. They say, imagine a foot that has been in dust since eternity. A footprint has always been beneath it, and nobody would doubt that the footprint was made by the pressure of the foot. Though neither is prior in time to the other, yet one is made by the other. I think this is a really neat example. So in what way, let's say the world was always around, in what way is it still caused by God? Because God doesn't need to be before anything else in order to be its cause. So this is the example. Imagine a foot. It doesn't even have to be attached to a guy. Just imagine a foot, okay, that's in sand. So if the foot is in sand right now, underneath the foot, there's a footprint in the sand, okay? So if you were to move the foot up, there would be a footprint, but you don't have to move it. You just leave it there. Right now, that foot is in the sand. Obviously, the foot is the cause of the footprint in the sand. Now, imagine that this foot has always been there, that the sand has always been there, and that the foot has always been in the sand from all eternity. There was never a beginning, it was just always there. Even if it was always there, it would still be the cause of that footprint. That the footprint is the effect of the foot. That's a kind of way, it's a sort of funny example, to show that even if the world had always been around like Aristotle thought, it would still be a creature of God and it would still be utterly dependent on him. That the kind of causation that creation is does not have to be before its effect in time. Okay. Now, this is just kind of getting us warmed up. Is it possible for the world to be created but to always have existed? Yes, it would still be a creature even if it always existed. Why or why not? Well, because a cause of this kind does not need to precede its effect in time. Is creation a change? Why or why not? No, it is not a change, because a change is from something to something else. There is nothing there before creation. Okay. What is, quote, creation in the creature? Go to page 349. Now we're going to go to the Summa. (349). Article 3, whether creation is anything in the creature. Go to the reply to objection 1. Creation signified actively means the divine action, which is God's essence. with a relation to the creature. Okay. The act of creation, creation signified actively. What is the act of creation? It's something that God does, but something that God does is God's essence. God is everything that we say of him. Remember, there's no distinction between God's simplicity and his wisdom and his whatever. Even the act of creation is God's essence, because it's God's action. But in God, relation to the creature is not a real relation, but only a relation of reason. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that, but it is important. This is a little bit sort of part of the humbling part of this. In God, nothing was added when he created. Because again, he's infinite. What could you add to him? So that means even the relationship to creatures wasn't added by creation itself. It was always there because from all eternity, he had chosen to create out of his goodness. That always was there from all eternity. Nothing changed there in God when creation happened. Okay. However, the relation of the creature to God is a real relation, as was said above. So what is, if you go a few lines above that, hence creation in the creature is simply a certain relation to the creator as to the principle of its being. So what is creation? In God, it's simply God's own essence. So nothing is added there. But creation in the creature is a relation. So what does it mean that I am a creature? It means I am related to God as my cause. That's what it is. That's what creation means. Okay. These are all sort of simple questions. The big one is going to be number 17, but let's look at number 16. What is the difference between being created and being concreated? Skip to page 351. I'm just going to give you the answer and then we'll work backwards. Go to right in the middle of page 351. It says, therefore, as accidents and forms and the like, non-subsisting things are said to coexist rather than to exist, so they ought to be called rather con-created rather than created things. So what is the difference between being created and being con-created? What God creates are substances, beings. God creates a tree. He creates Father Andy. He creates whatever, an atom or a rock or whatever. Okay, those are things that are created. What is concreated? Well, concreated is when a substance is created, certain things are created along with it that subsist in it. Accidents, form and matter, individually understood, those are concreated. Why are they concreated? Because there's no such thing as an accident that exists independently. There's no such thing as just like brown. Brown isn't a thing that God created. He created a tree that has a brown bark. And so brown is concreated along with brown things, like a brown tree. Same thing with form and matter, or at least natural forms and matter. Prime matter can't exist on its own. So prime matter was concreated with substances. A form, a material form, can't exist on its own. There's no such thing as just the form of a tree. The form of that tree is concreated when the tree is created. And when means instantaneously. So God right now is creating that tree. In creating the tree, he is concreating the form and matter of that tree and the accidents of that tree. Okay, so any of those would be concreated. Substances alone are, properly speaking, created. Okay, all that's the easy stuff. Now I'm going to go to the big question. So let me see what I have left, actually. You know what, let me do number 18 anyway. And then I'll get back to number 17. We're going to have a short-ish class today. That's good. So number 18, why is it more evident that there is a God if the universe had a temporal beginning? It's more evident. It's not that it's impossible. Let me find where that citation is. Go to page 368. So why is this a question? Because in the book on the eternity of the world that we just went over, He says, well, God can create and the world can have been around forever and he would still be the creator. But why is it more evident? He means more evident to us. Why is it more obvious that the world has a creator if the world had a beginning in time? Well, because, page 368, right in the middle of the world, for the world leads more evidently to the knowledge of the divine creating power if it was not always than if it had always been, since everything which was not always manifestly has a cause, whereas this is not so manifest of what always was. It's more about being obvious. If the world always was around, yeah, maybe some super smart people could really sit around and think, okay, there's still dependence of the world still needs to be created by something that's permanent and necessary. Yeah, really super smart people can really think, you know what? Even if something's always around, it still needs to be caused. Maybe. But everybody knows if something wasn't around and then it started being around, well, then obviously there was a cause there. So it's more obvious because in our understanding of causality, much of the causality that we see does happen in time. That there was not something and then it was something. It's more obvious that there's a cause there. So that's what makes it sort of more manifest, because in our eyes, cause and effect follow in time, and we sort of naturally kind of read that into other types of causation. Even though that's not the way God works, it's more obvious to us when the world starts in time. And in fact, even Bertrand Russell, who was a 20th century philosopher, who was a very, very sort of notorious atheist, he has a whole book called Why I Am Not a Christian. In that book, he actually, and this was written in the early 20th century, Bertrand Russell says, well, look, if they could establish that the universe had a beginning, this is before the Big Bang theory came out. Bertrand Russell said, well, if science could show that the world had a beginning, okay, well, then there's obviously a God. Even Bertrand Russell says that. So that's sort of how obvious it was, that if there was nothing and then suddenly there was something, okay, something caused that. Okay. That's that question. Now I'm going to get to number 17. Why can only God create? And then connected to that, which we'll see why, how is an instrumental cause used? Right? Let me set the stage for this. So I'm going to be talking on the article 5 of, I think, question 45. Let me verify that. Question 45, article 5. Whether it belongs to God alone to create. Okay. Earlier in his career, Aquinas taught that we know through revelation that God alone created the world. Okay. However, it would have been possible for God to create the world not directly, but through the means of, through the instrumentality of another creature. For example, and this is the way sort of he was imagining it, because there were Arab philosophers that taught this. God would create some super powerful angel, and then he would command that angel to go and create other angels, or to go and create the physical world or something like that. And that angel could go about and bring about from nothing other angels and physical things. Okay. Earlier in his career, Aquinas taught that was possible. And there are books, let me just actually show it to you 1 second. Okay, so this is the book. It's called Aquinas on Creation. It's a translation of a section of Aquinas's commentary on the sentences of Peter Lombard, done by the scholar Stephen Baldner, who's a really, really nice guy. Actually, Stephen Baldner and William Carroll. This is one of the most critical books in my own philosophical journey. This is one of the books that when I read it, and we did a seminar just on this book, it made me really want to study philosophy more. It's awesome. But in this book, it shows early in Aquinas' career, following the master named Peter Lombard, who was this other medieval philosopher and theologian, he taught that God could have given the power to create to a creature. We know he didn't through revelation, but he could have done it. That's what he taught here. Okay. By the time he writes the Summa, as we're going to find out, he changes his mind on this. And he says, not that he could have, but that he could not have. It is impossible for God to give the power to create to a creature. Okay. Now, what changes in that time is a really interesting topic, and I might be able to talk about it today. I think I'll have time to talk about it today. But I just want you to know this is a question that Aquinas changes his mind on. And the reason why he changes his mind is something that I think is really fascinating and beautiful. Okay. So, 353 at the top. I answer that it sufficiently appears at first glance, according to what precedes, 1, that to create can be the action of God alone. Now, it's a little bit ironic that he says at first glance it sufficiently appears. Well, it didn't work. You didn't get it at the first glance, but what precedes, there were different things in what preceded. Aquinas learned something by the time he wrote the Summa. Why? For the more universal effects must be reduced to the more universal prior causes. Now, among all effects, the most universal being is being itself, and hence it must be the proper effect of the first and most universal cause, and that is God. So what is it to create? It's to give something existence. Now, what can you and I do? Well, we can contribute to things having an essence. For example, when you have kids, you're not creating them because you're not bringing them out of nothing. However, you're passing on your essence, which is human being, onto, that kid. Okay. So you can contribute to something's essence. I can contribute to your accidents. I can make you know something, and I can't make you, but I can help you to know something that you didn't know before. Somebody can you can give somebody a black eye or by punching them in the face or something like that. So there's different types of causality that we practice, but giving something existence, that's what creation is. And existence is the most universal effect, and therefore there's a sort of propriety. It's proper for the most universal effect to be given by the most universal cause, and that's God. Okay. That's proper. That's sort of like, okay, that sort of rhymes. It sort of makes sense. That's not exactly the philosophical argument yet. Go to the next paragraph. So now we're not talking about whether it's the most proper. We're not talking about whether it's appropriate or not appropriate. Now we're going to talk about whether it's at all possible for a creature to create, even with the power of God. It happens, however, that something participates the proper action of another, not by its own power, but instrumentally, inasmuch as it acts by the power of another, as air can heat and ignite by the power of fire. So let's look at this example. So if I got a piece of paper, I kind of want to light a piece of paper on fire, but that's probably a bad idea. But let's say you have a piece of paper, okay? If you take a lighter and just light it, and you just put the flame right on the paper, it'll burn. So to ignite or to burn is the proper action of fire. Proper means it's sort of the job of fire to burn stuff, right? Air, there's plenty of air in this room, it's not burning this paper. Okay? Whereas if there was fire and this thing was flammable, it couldn't help but to ignite. Whereas there's plenty of air in this room and it's not on fire right now. However, can air light this on fire? Yes, not by its own power, but by the power of another. If I have a lighter and I'm lighting it and it's down here, let's say it's like 4 or 5 inches underneath it, the flame itself is not touching the paper. Only the air between the flame and the paper is touching it. But if you hold the lighter there long enough, the heat, the air itself will get so hot that the paper will light on fire. You can try it. Don't do it inside your house, but you can try it. That the flame can heat the air, and then the air, by the power that is given to it from the flame, can ignite the paper. It's not the job of air to light things on fire. It's not proper to air, but can air do it? Can it be an instrument of lighting something on fire with the power of the flame? Yes, it can. So fire can heat air so that air can burn things. Okay, that's an instrumental cause. An instrumental cause is something that operates by the power of another. All right? Not by its own proper power. So now the question is going to become, well, can a creature create that way as an instrumental cause? Can an angel bring something out of nothing using the power of God? And so some have supposed that although creation is the proper act of the universal cause, still some inferior cause, acting by the power of the first cause, can create. And so Avicenna asserted that the first separate substance, the first angel, created by God, created another after itself, and the substance of the world and its soul, and that the substance of the world creates the matter of inferior bodies. And in the same manner, the master, Peter Lombard, says that God can communicate to a creature the power of creating so that the latter can create ministerially, not by its own power. So he's citing Avicenna and Peter Lombard that this is possible, that a creature can be given the power to create as an instrumental cause. Here's where Aquinas disagrees with him. But such a thing cannot be. Why? Why did he change his mind? Because the secondary instrumental cause does not participate the action of the superior cause, except inasmuch as by something proper to itself, it acts dispositively to the effect of the principal agent. This is beautiful. I'm going to explain it. I know it may not have made any sense, but it's a beautiful thing. The instrumental cause does not do anything unless it provides something proper to itself. It acts dispositively. It disposes. Okay? So, for example, the air and the lighter, in what way does the air sort of provide something? Well, it can fill up the distance between the flame and the paper. It also has the ability to get that hot on its own. I mean, not on its own, but it has the ability to get that hot. So air, it's not that air, like, it causes the heat itself, but it's able to get that hot in order to, ignite the paper on fire. So it sort of provides something of itself. Of its own nature, air has the ability to get that warm, and it has the ability to sort of fill the space between the flame and the paper. So it does provide something. It's not that it's doing nothing. So the insight here is that an instrumental cause is not a straw. It's not just an empty pipe through which God pours his power. An instrumental cause adds something of itself. So when God uses an instrument, he uses it for a reason. And the instrument itself is something. And whatever that instrument is, it's providing something when it's being used as an instrument. Okay. So if therefore it affects nothing, according to what is proper to itself, it is used for no purpose, nor would there be any need of certain instruments for certain actions. So if an instrument was just a straw, well, then why use it? Why would God? There's just no reason to do it. And there's actually, we're gonna see later that it's actually impossible. But even before we see that it's impossible, it'd be pointless. Why would God use an instrument if the instrument's not going to do anything? He's not. What does it mean that he's using it? Okay, so that's one really important insight. That when God uses an instrument, now you can even think about this in yourself and in your own sort of spirituality. God is using us all as instruments to do whatever, bring salvation to the world, whatever. What does it mean that he's using us as instruments? It's not that we're just this straw and we provide nothing. I just happen to be in the right place at the right time. And it's all God. It's not me at all. That's not quite precise. Now it's true because God also made you to be what you are. So in some sense, everything is all God. But you are something. And whatever it is that you are, God is using. And he's using what is proper to you in order to accomplish various things in the world. Hopefully good things. Okay. So it sort of shows that creatures have the dignity of causality. We are able to cause things not by some sort of weird accidental way, but because of what we are, both as human beings, but also as individuals. And so the flame itself, did God create the flame? Yes, but he created it. And when he creates something, he gives it the power to operate. That it would be meaningless to make creatures that are just holograms. They just look like stuff, but they don't actually do anything. So in Aquinas, there's a very rich sort of ontology, metaphysics of creation. Creation is not just a bunch of stuff that you can sort of look at and maybe bump into. It's full of active beings that are able to do stuff of themselves. They're not independent of God, but when God creates them, he creates them as causal entities, beings that can do things with their own nature. Why am I stressing this? Because other philosophers before Aquinas, again, some of the Arab philosophers, they said when the flame itself, you just light a piece of paper on fire by touching a flame to it, the flame's actually doing nothing. When the flame is igniting the paper, it's God igniting the paper. It's not the flame at all. That's incomplete. That means that, like, okay, then why did God create? If it's just a bunch of holograms and God's really doing everything behind the scenes. Now, what's true about it? Well, if God weren't creating the flame at every moment, it would not exist. But when he's creating it, creation means he's allowing it to do stuff really within itself. This is the really sort of intricate balance there. I think that's a beautiful idea. I think that's something that it helps your self-esteem to think about that. Like, God created me, and it's not just that like I'm this piece of crap. No, he created me, which means I have causal powers. Much less I'm a human being with an intellect and a will and all that. That's on top of it. Just think about what it is that you're a creature. It's that you have this intimate relationship with God at every moment, and he is creating you right now. It's not that I wasn't an accident. Oh, God doesn't create accidents. It's not, forget about your past. At this moment, he is creating you. And what it means is creating you, we're going to get into it in a little bit. But at this moment, he's creating you. And what it means that he's creating you with all the stuff that you are and all of the abilities that you have. Okay. I find that really kind of inspiring and kind of like beautiful. So now let's look at this example. Thus we see that a saw in cutting wood, which it does by the property of its own form, produces the form of a bench, which is the proper effect of the principal agent. So think about this example of a saw. Let me get a knife, for example. So I've got this knife, okay? When I use this knife to cut a piece of paper, I guess I can cut a piece of paper. That's less dangerous. When I use this knife to cut the syllabus, okay? See how sharp it is. Okay, it's pretty sharp. Could I tear the paper without the knife? Sure. I could just use my hand and tear it and illustrate that, okay? But does the knife provide something? Sure. It provides sharpness. Well, in order for it to be sharp, it's got to be made of something that can be sharpened. So metal, it's usually like a combination of iron and carbon and some other stuff that can prevent it from rusting and stuff like that. So what it's made of provides something, but then also the fact that it's sharp, so the shape of it provides something that I can use to cut the paper. And and I can cut it a lot more cleanly than I did with my hand. So it's actually providing something through its own form and even its own matter, okay? Again, you think about then when God makes and uses an instrument, same thing. We're providing something of ourselves. Okay. However, can the knife cut unless I'm using it? No. So it still has to sort of trace all the way back to the primary cause. Now, the proper effect of God creating is what is presupposed to all other effects, and that is absolute being. Hence, nothing else can act dispositively and instrumentally to this cause, since creation is not from anything presupposed, which can be disposed by the action of the instrumental agent. He's a little bit being very technical here. What is it that an instrumental agent does? It disposes. So what is I'm going to make this sort of spiritual immediately. What is it that we can do in the action of God? Well, I can't give somebody grace, but I can help predispose them through my actions, through my words. And, I can't kind of cause somebody to believe. That's the action of God. But through my speech and whatever, St. Paul says, like, how are they to believe if they have no one to preach? So I can predispose them through whatever I'm doing. But in predisposing them, I have to exist already, but so do they. There has to be somebody or something that's already there for me to work with. So why does that work sort of in making things and cutting pieces of paper, making benches or painting things or writing stories? All that's about predisposing or sort of rearranging stuff that's already there. Why does it work for all of that but not with creation? Because with creation, the whole meaning of creation is there's nothing there beforehand. And if there's nothing there beforehand, what's an instrumental cause there? What does it have to work with? It has nothing to work with, so there's no reason for it to be used at all. And there's no way for it to be used at all. Okay. I hope all that's pretty clear. This last point I want to make, which is also, I think, really amazing. Go to reply to objection 3. Now, actually, go to objection 3, page 352, towards the bottom. Further, the power of the maker is considered according to the measure of what is made, but created being is finite, as we proved above when treating of the infinity of God. Therefore, only a finite power is needed to produce a creature by creation. But to have a finite power is not contrary to the nature of a creature. So this objection is pretty interesting, right? The objection says, well, a creature, this pen is finite. So why would it not take finite power to create a pen? And if it takes finite power, why can't a finite creature have that power? Interesting objection, right? What is the problem with it? Well, the premise is wrong. It doesn't take finite power to create a finite thing. Why? Reply to objection 3. The power of the maker is reckoned not only from the substance of the thing made, but also from the mode of its being made. Okay, mode means way. So the amount of power is not only about the production, but it's about the way it's made. Well, how is this made? For a greater heat, heats not only more, but quicker. So it's not just what it's heating, but how it's heating. In this case, how fast, in this example of heat. Therefore, although to create a finite effect does not show an infinite power, but to create it from nothing, that's the way it's made, does show an infinite power. So even though this pen or a fly or the smallest molecule or the smallest volume of empty space, the absolute smallest imaginable portion of empty space, though it's finite, to bring it out of nothing, to make it in that way out of nothing, requires infinite power. For if a greater power is required in the agent in proportion to the distance of the potentiality from the act, it follows that the power of that which produces something from no presupposed potentiality is infinite, because there's no proportion between no potentiality and the potentiality supposed by the power of a natural agent. This is amazing. So let's say I've got this water, and let's say it's a certain temperature. I don't know, maybe it's about 50, 60 degrees. Maybe it's kind of cold today. Maybe 60, 70 degrees, something like that, right? So it's a certain number of degrees. For me to boil it till it's 212 degrees Fahrenheit, there's a certain distance between this temperature and the temperature of boiling. That's going to require a certain amount of energy. And you can actually calculate that with great precision. And you can even sort of factor in the installation and all that's required and all that. You can calculate it very, very well. And if all the same conditions are there and the water's a little bit colder, it's going to take a little bit more power to boil it. Okay? Aquinas is right about that. And if it's a little bit warmer, it's going to take less power to boil it. So far, so good. So Aquinas is taking that point that the distance between the cause and the effect, or between where the potentiality and the actuality, not cause and effect, between the potentiality and actuality, that distance is one of the things that indicates how much power is required. Okay, this is the new point. There is no proportion between non-being and being. Whatever the being is, it could be a mountain, or it could be, like I said, an infinitesimally small volume of empty space. That is infinitely distant from non-being. Okay. And to bring even a gnat or a fly or a molecule into being from non-being, that is an infinite distance. It's not a numeric proportion. And to cross an infinite distance, metaphorically speaking, requires infinite power. And so, because no creature has simply an infinite power, any more than it has infinite being, it follows that no creature can create. What does that mean? It means that not only is God creating you right now and at every moment, God is using infinite power to create just you, and just every single hair on your head and every molecule in your body requires infinite power to bring out of nothing. And at every moment, God is, present tense, using infinite power to bring you and every creature into existence. That's what the act of creation is about and what it means. I think that's all I wanted to talk about today. We'll see what you guys want to talk about when we get in class. But let me just make sure I'm Moodle. Why can only God create? How is an instrumental cause used? So why can only God create? All of that, because it requires infinite power, and it's the most universal effect, and so it must go back to the universal cause. And even an instrumental cause, this answers the second part of the question, an instrumental cause can only be used with by what is proper to itself. Okay, and the whole thing about disposition and all that. Okay, so we'll see if there's any questions when I see you. Otherwise, start studying for the midterm, and I will see you in person pretty soon. Peace out.